Sophie Martinez adjusted the water temperature in the large stainless steel grooming tub at Pampered Paws Pet Salon in the Pearl District of Portland, Oregon, testing it against her wrist the way she'd done thousands of times over 9 years of working as a professional dog groomer. The water needed to be warm, but not hot, comfortable for the dog's sensitive skin, perfect for working up a good lather with the hypoallergenic shampoo the salon used for puppies and dogs with sensitive skin. It was a Tuesday morning in late April, just after 10 a.m., and Sophie was preparing for her third appointment of the day, a golden retriever puppy scheduled for a bath, nail trim and sanitary clip. At 35 years old, Sophie had been grooming dogs professionally since she was 26, right after graduating from a certified dog grooming program at the Oregon Dog Grooming School. She'd started at a large corporate chain, PetSmart, where she'd learned the efficiency and customer service skills necessary for high-volume grooming. But after 3 years of rushing through appointments and dealing with corporate policies that prioritized speed over quality, Sophie had moved to Pampered Paws, a locally owned boutique grooming salon that catered to Portland's dog-obsessed population and emphasized gentle patient handling of pets over assembly line efficiency. Sophie loved her work with a passion that people who didn't understand the human-animal bond often found puzzling. She loved the dogs, each with their own personality, quirks, fears, and preferences. She loved the quiet satisfaction of transforming a matted, dirty dog into a clean, comfortable, beautifully groomed pet. She loved the trust that developed between her and her regular canine clients, the way dogs who'd initially been nervous about grooming would eventually walk into the salon eagerly, recognizing Sophie and knowing they were safe with her. She loved being part of keeping pets healthy, catching skin conditions or ear infections or dental problems during grooming that owners might have missed. The work was physically demanding. Sophie spent hours on her feet, lifting dogs weighing anywhere from 5 to 80 pounds onto grooming tables, wrestling with squirming puppies or anxious adults, contorting into awkward positions to reach difficult areas, getting soaked with bath water and covered in dog hair. She dealt with dogs who bit, who thrashed, who were terrified of the dryer or nail clippers, who had been neglected and came in so matted their fur had to be shaved down to the skin. She dealt with difficult owners who wanted their dogs groomed in ways that were uncomfortable or unhealthy for the animals, who complained about prices, who dropped off aggressive dogs without warning, who expected miracles with severely neglected coats. But despite the challenges, Sophie found the work deeply rewarding. She made decent money, $45,000 a year including tips, which was modest but livable for a single woman sharing an apartment with a roommate in Portland. She had health insurance through the salon. She had a flexible schedule that allowed her to pursue her side passion of volunteering at a local animal rescue on weekends. And most importantly, she spent her days working with animals, which was all Sophie had ever wanted to do since she was a child growing up in a working-class neighborhood in southeast Portland, dreaming of becoming a veterinarian before the reality of expensive veterinary school made that dream unattainable. Sophie checked the appointment schedule on the computer screen mounted near the grooming station. Her 10 a.m. appointment was listed as Max Golden Retriever Puppy, 4 months old, first visit, full groom. The owner's name was listed as Jennifer Blake. Sophie pulled up the intake form that all new clients filled out, scanning for important information about the dog, any health issues, behavioral concerns, previous grooming experience, specific instructions. The form was sparse. No veterinarian listed, no medical history noted, previous grooming experience marked as none. Special instructions simply said standard puppy groom. The contact information listed a phone number and an address in Northeast Portland. Payment method was a credit card on file under the name Jennifer Blake. Sophie made a mental note of the lack of detailed information. Responsible pet owners usually provided veterinary references and detailed health histories, especially for puppies. But it wasn't uncommon for new clients to provide minimal information, and Sophie could assess the dog's needs once she saw him. The bell above the salon's front door chimed, indicating a client had arrived. Sophie walked to the reception area where her co-worker Amanda Chen was checking in the new arrival. A woman in her late 20s stood at the counter, holding a leash attached to an adorable golden retriever puppy who sat quietly at her feet. The puppy had the characteristic fluffy coat and sweet face of the breed, with soft brown eyes and oversized paws that indicated he'd grow into a large adult dog. "Hi, I'm here for Max's 10 a.m. grooming appointment," the woman said. She was dressed professionally in business casual attire, slacks and a blouse, and held car keys and a phone in her hand as if she was in a hurry. "Perfect, you're right on time," Amanda said, processing the check-in. "This is Max's first visit with us, correct?" "Yes, first time," the woman confirmed. "Great. Sophie will be grooming Max today. She's wonderful with puppies. You can expect the grooming to take about 2 hours. We'll call you when Max is ready for pickup." The woman nodded, handed the leash to Amanda, and left quickly without much interaction with the puppy. No goodbye, no reassuring words to the dog, just a business-like handoff. Sophie found this slightly odd. Most owners, especially of puppies, were more affectionate and concerned, asking questions about the grooming process and saying emotional goodbyes as if they were leaving their child at daycare. Amanda brought Max back to Sophie's grooming station. "Here's your 10 a.m. He's adorable." Sophie knelt down to greet the puppy, letting him sniff her hand and speaking in a soft, friendly tone. "Hi, Max. Aren't you a handsome boy? We're going to get you all clean and pretty today." Max wagged his tail and licked Sophie's hand, showing the friendly, trusting temperament, typical of golden retrievers. He appeared healthy at first glance, good weight, shiny coat, alert and responsive. Sophie lifted Max onto the grooming table and began a thorough examination before starting the bath. This was standard practice, checking the dog's overall condition, looking for any injuries, skin problems, ear infections, dental issues, or signs of illness or neglect that might affect how she approached the grooming. As Sophie ran her hands through Max's coat and examined him closely, she noticed a few concerning things. First, Max had fleas. Not a massive infestation, but definitely fleas. Sophie could see the small black parasites moving through his fur and spotted flea dirt, digested blood that looked like black specks when she parted his coat. This was surprising for a puppy who presumably had an owner who could afford boutique grooming. Flea prevention was basic puppy care, and any veterinarian would have prescribed preventative medication during initial puppy visits. Second, Max's ears were dirty and had a slight odor suggesting the beginning of an ear infection, another sign of inadequate basic care. Healthy puppies who were receiving proper veterinary attention shouldn't have dirty ears progressing toward infection. Third, Max didn't have a collar with identification tags, just the temporary slip lead the owner had used to bring him in. Most responsible owners put collars with ID tags on their puppies immediately, especially in a city where a lost dog could quickly become a tragedy. Fourth, and most concerning, Max had what looked like a recent injury on his left hind leg, a healing cut or scrape that had scabbed over, but suggested the puppy had been somewhere rough or had been handled roughly. Sophie made notes of all these observations in Max's grooming record. She would mention the fleas, ear issues, and injury to the owner at pickup and recommend veterinary attention. For now, she proceeded with the grooming, starting with a gentle flea bath, using special flea-killing shampoo the salon kept on hand for exactly these situations. Max was an angel during the entire grooming process. He stood patiently in the tub during his bath, didn't struggle or try to jump out, tolerated the blow-dryer with only minor nervousness typical for a puppy, and sat calmly for his nail trim and sanitary clip. Sophie praised him constantly, gave him treats, and found herself growing attached to the sweet-natured puppy. By the time she finished, Max looked beautiful, his golden coat fluffy and clean, his nails trimmed, his face and paws neatly shaped. When Jennifer Blake returned to pick up Max 2 hours later, Sophie brought the puppy out to the reception area and addressed the owner professionally. Max did great for his first grooming. He was so well behaved, but I did notice a few things I wanted to mention. He has fleas, which I treated during the bath, but you'll need to get a veterinary prescription for monthly flea prevention to keep them from coming back. His ears are also dirty and have a slight odor. I cleaned them, but you should have a vet check for infection. And he has a healing injury on his back leg. Has he been seen by a vet recently? Jennifer looked uncomfortable with the questions. Oh, I'll take care of all that. Thanks for letting me know. She paid quickly with a credit card, took Max's leash, and left without the usual questions Sophie expected from puppy owners. No asking about how often to groom, what products to use at home, whether the puppy had behaved well, whether Sophie had any training recommendations. Sophie watched through the salon window as Jennifer loaded Max into a car parked on the street. Not a car seat or crate, just loose in the back seat. Another sign of an owner who wasn't following basic puppy safety practices. The woman drove off quickly, and Sophie returned to preparing for her next appointment, feeling vaguely uneasy about the interaction, but unable to articulate exactly why. 6 days later, on a Monday morning, Sophie's 9 a.m. appointment was listed as Max, golden retriever puppy, 4 months old, bath and nail trim. Sophie assumed it was the same puppy returning for another grooming, though she was surprised the owner had booked so soon. Puppies didn't typically need grooming every week. But when Sophie checked the appointment details, she saw the owner name was different. David Park. Different name, different contact information, different payment method. When a man in his 30s arrived with Max, Sophie was puzzled. "Hi, I'm Sophie. I'll be grooming Max today. I actually groomed him last week. Did Jennifer Blake refer you to us?" The man looked confused. "Jennifer Blake? No, I don't know anyone by that name. I'm Max's owner, David Park. This is his first time at your salon." Sophie studied the puppy. It was definitely the same dog, same size, same coloring, same distinctive white patch on his chest, same sweet temperament. But this man claimed to be the owner and had no knowledge of the previous visit. "I apologize, but I'm almost certain I groomed this exact puppy 6 days ago. He has a very distinctive appearance, and I remember him clearly. The owner who brought him in was a woman named Jennifer Blake." David Park shook his head, looking annoyed. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about. This is my dog. I adopted him 3 weeks ago. This is his first grooming. Can we just get started?" Sophie didn't want to argue with a client, so she took Max back to the grooming area, but her unease intensified. Something was wrong here. Either this man was lying about being Max's owner, or Jennifer Blake had lied, or there was some very strange custody situation happening. But the man's confusion had seemed genuine. He truly didn't know about the previous grooming appointment. As Sophie bathed Max again, she examined him carefully. He still had fleas, suggesting the previous owner hadn't followed Sophie's recommendation for flea treatment. His ears were still dirty. The injury on his leg looked the same, no better, no worse. And worryingly, Max seemed more lethargic than he'd been during the previous visit. He stood in the tub with less energy, his eyes less bright, his tail wagging less enthusiastically. When David Park returned to pick up Max, Sophie tried again to get information. "Max is such a sweet puppy. How long have you had him again?" "About 3 weeks. I got him from a breeder." "Which breeder?" "I'm always curious about good golden retriever breeders in the area." David looked uncomfortable. "Just a small breeder. I don't remember the name. I found them online." This was another red flag. Responsible people who paid potentially thousands of dollars for a purebred puppy from a breeder absolutely remembered the breeder's name, and usually had ongoing relationships with the breeder for questions and support. Sophie let it go, not wanting to make the client so uncomfortable he complained to management, but she made detailed notes in Max's file about the 2 visits with different owners, and her concerns about the dog's health and the inconsistent information. Over the next 6 weeks, Max came into Pampered Paws 5 more times, each time with a different owner. Each time Sophie confirmed it was definitely the same puppy. She'd started taking photos of Max during each visit to document his distinctive markings and his progressively worsening condition. Each time the owner provided different contact information, different pickup addresses, different payment methods, and each time they claimed to be Max's owner with no knowledge of previous groomings. The names on the appointments: Jennifer Blake, David Park, Lisa Rodriguez, Michael Thompson, Sarah Chen, Robert Williams, Amanda Foster. 7 different people claiming ownership of the same puppy over 8 weeks. With each visit, Max's condition deteriorated. The fleas persisted. His ears developed a full infection that Sophie could smell when she lifted him onto the grooming table. He lost weight, his ribs becoming visible under his coat. His energy decreased. He no longer wagged his tail enthusiastically, no longer greeted Sophie with puppy excitement, just stood listlessly during grooming. His eyes lost their sparkle, looking dull and sad. New injuries appeared: scratches, bruises, a limp in his front leg. Sophie documented everything in Max's file and took photos with each visit. She started leaving detailed notes recommending immediate veterinary care, but none of the various owners seemed to follow through. She tried asking more questions. Where did they get Max? Why was he being groomed so frequently? Why wasn't he receiving veterinary care? But each owner gave vague, evasive answers and seemed eager to leave quickly. Sophie's co-workers noticed her growing concern. Amanda, who checked in several of Max's appointments, pulled Sophie aside after the puppy's 6th visit. "I've been thinking about that golden retriever puppy, Max. It's really weird that different people keep bringing him in claiming to be his owner, right? And he looks sicker every time." "I know," Sophie said. "Something is definitely wrong. I've been documenting everything, but I don't know what to do. I can't refuse to groom him. The owners are paying customers, and the dog needs the grooming. But I'm watching this puppy deteriorate, and I feel helpless." "Do you think they're flipping him?" Amanda asked. "Like buying and reselling him over and over?" "I've read about that. People steal or buy dogs cheaply, and then resell them multiple times, making profit each time." Sophie had been thinking the same thing.
Dog flipping was a known problem. Criminals would steal dogs or buy them cheaply from irresponsible breeders, then advertise them on Craigslist or Facebook as purebred puppies from good homes, selling them to unsuspecting buyers for hundreds or thousands of dollars. Sometimes the same dog was sold multiple times to different victims, each thinking they were getting a healthy puppy from a legitimate source. That would explain the different owners and why none of them seemed to have any real attachment to him, Sophie said, and why they're not getting him veterinary care if you're just going to sell the dog in a few days. Why spend money on vet bills? Should we call police? Amanda asked. And say what? A puppy has been groomed 7 times by different people. That's not a crime. We don't have proof of anything illegal. But Sophie knew she couldn't continue watching Max deteriorate without taking some action. That evening, she researched dog flipping and pet theft online, reading disturbing articles about the scope of the problem. Tens of thousands of dogs were stolen every year in the United States, taken from yards, snatched while tied up outside stores, stolen from cars, even taken during home burglaries specifically targeting valuable purebred dogs. Many stolen dogs ended up being sold to unsuspecting buyers who had no idea they were purchasing stolen property. Others ended up in research labs, fighting rings, or puppy mills. The American Kennel Club's website had information about the growing epidemic of pet theft and warned owners about the dangers of buying dogs from Craigslist or other unverified sources without seeing health records, meeting the parents, or visiting the breeding facility. The site recommended always microchipping dogs, keeping them leashed or supervised, and being cautious about sharing information about expensive purebred dogs on social media. Sophie wondered if Max had been stolen, or if he'd been obtained from a puppy mill or irresponsible breeder, and was now being flipped repeatedly to different buyers. Either way, the puppy was suffering, not receiving veterinary care, being passed between different homes every week or two, not forming attachments with humans, possibly being kept in poor conditions between sales. When Max came in for his 8th grooming appointment on a Wednesday morning in mid-June, Sophie's heart sank at his appearance. The puppy, now approximately 6 months old, looked skeletal. His ribs and hip bones protruded sharply. His coat, which should have been thick and lustrous, was dull and thin. His eyes were sunken and listless. He moved slowly as if in pain. He had multiple visible injuries, scratches on his face, a swollen paw, fur missing in patches. The owner who'd brought him in, a woman who'd given her name as Amanda Foster, had dropped him off quickly and left. Sophie lifted Max onto the grooming table and immediately noticed his breathing was labored, his gums pale. This puppy was seriously ill, possibly dying. Sophie made a decision. She called her manager, Patricia Nguyen, to the grooming area. "Patricia, I need you to see this dog. I've been grooming him for 8 weeks and he's been brought in by 7 different people claiming to be his owner. He's deteriorating rapidly and I believe he's very sick. I don't think I should groom him. I think he needs emergency veterinary care." Patricia examined Max, her expression growing grave. "You're right. This dog is in bad shape. This is beyond grooming concerns. This is animal neglect or abuse. We should call animal control." Before they could make that call, Max collapsed on the grooming table. His breathing became rapid and shallow, his body trembling. Sophie grabbed her phone and called the emergency veterinary clinic 3 blocks away, explaining she had a critically ill puppy who needed immediate help. "Bring him in right now," the emergency vet said. "It sounds like he's crashing." Sophie wrapped Max gently in a towel, told Patricia she was taking the puppy to the emergency vet, and ran the 3 blocks to Dove Lewis Emergency Animal Hospital, Portland's 24-hour emergency veterinary clinic. She burst through the doors with Max in her arms, and staff immediately took the puppy back to the treatment area. Sophie waited in the reception area, calling her manager to explain what had happened. Patricia told her to stay at the vet clinic and keep her updated. Sophie also called the phone number Amanda Foster had provided on the grooming intake form, but it went straight to a disconnected number message. Not surprising given that none of the contact information from the various owners had been legitimate. After 20 agonizing minutes, a veterinarian came out to speak with Sophie. Dr. Rachel Foster was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a serious expression. "Are you the dog's owner?" "No, I'm a dog groomer. Max was brought to our salon for grooming and he collapsed. I don't actually know who his real owner is. He's been brought in by different people claiming ownership over the past 2 months. Dr. Foster's expression hardened. "That's concerning. This puppy is severely malnourished, dehydrated, and has a serious respiratory infection, ear infections, intestinal parasites, and what appears to be parvovirus. He's also covered in injuries suggesting rough handling or abuse. Honestly, I'm surprised he's still alive. His condition is consistent with severe neglect over an extended period. Can you save him?" Sophie asked, tears forming in her eyes. "We're trying," Dr. Foster said, "but he's very weak. The parvo is advanced. He should have been treated weeks ago when symptoms first appeared. We're providing IV fluids, antibiotics, anti-nausea medication, and supportive care, but his chances aren't good. Parvo is often fatal in puppies, especially when treatment is delayed this long. Sophie felt sick. She'd watched this puppy deteriorate over 8 weeks, had documented his declining condition, had recommended veterinary care at every visit, and still Max had reached this critical state. Is there any way to identify who his actual owner is? He doesn't have a microchip or ID tags. No microchip. You're right, we checked. But he does have something interesting. When we shaved his leg to place an IV catheter, we found a tattoo. It's very faint, but it's there. Looks like a breeder identification tattoo, usually placed in a puppy's ear or inner thigh by responsible breeders to identify their dogs. The number is GR7423. Breeder identification tattoos were used by some legitimate breeders to track their puppies and prove ownership. If Sophie could identify the breeder through the tattoo number, she might be able to find Max's actual owner and understand how he'd ended up being flipped between multiple people over 2 months. Sophie asked Dr. Foster for the tattoo number and permission to try to track down the breeder. I'm going to figure out where this puppy came from and what happened to him. This isn't right. I agree, Dr. Foster said. This is a case of severe animal neglect at minimum, possibly theft and resale fraud as well. We're required to report cases of animal abuse to animal control, so I'll be filing a report with Multnomah County Animal Services. You should document everything you've observed, and provide that information to animal control as well. Sophie returned to Pampered Paws and spent the rest of the afternoon compiling every piece of information she had about Max. Dates of all 8 grooming appointments, names and contact information provided by the various owners. Photos documenting Max's deteriorating condition over 2 months. Notes about the fleas, infections, injuries, and behavioral changes she'd observed. Copies of grooming records showing the different payment methods and addresses associated with each appointment. She also started researching the breeder tattoo number, GR7423. After calling several Golden Retriever breed clubs and searching online databases of registered breeders, Sophie found a potential match, Golden Ridge Kennel in Bend, Oregon, a reputable breeder who tattooed all their puppies with identification numbers starting with GR, followed by a 4-digit number corresponding to the puppy's birth order and litter. Sophie called Golden Ridge Kennel and spoke with the owner, a woman named Margaret Richardson, who'd been breeding Golden Retrievers for 20 years. Hi, my name is Sophie Martinez and I'm calling from Portland. I'm a dog groomer and I've been grooming a Golden Retriever puppy who has the tattoo number GR7423. I'm trying to identify the puppy's owner because he's been brought into my salon by multiple different people and is now critically ill at an emergency vet hospital. Margaret's response was immediate and emotional. GR7423. That's one of my puppies. That would be a male from my spring litter 3 months ago. I sold him to a family in Portland in March. His registered name is Golden Ridge Maxwell, but they were calling him Max. What do you mean he's at an emergency vet? What's happened to him?
Sophie explained the entire situation, Max being brought in by 7 different people over 8 weeks, his progressively worsening condition, the neglect and injuries, the collapse during today's grooming, the emergency vet's diagnosis of severe neglect, parvovirus and multiple infections. Margaret was horrified and angry. This is exactly what I try to prevent by being careful about who I sell my puppies to. I screen buyers extensively, require applications and references, visit homes and include clauses in my contracts requiring buyers to return puppies to me if they can no longer keep them for any reason. The family I sold Max to, the Johnsons, seemed perfect. Professional couple, beautiful home, experience with dogs passed all my screening. They signed a contract promising to provide proper care, veterinary attention, training, and to never sell or give away the puppy without my knowledge. Do you have contact information for the Johnsons? Sophie asked. Yes, of course. I maintain relationships with all my puppy buyers and require them to send regular updates. But now that I think about it, I haven't received any updates about Max in over a month, which is unusual. I sent them an email 2 weeks ago asking for photos and didn't get a response. I assumed they were just busy. Margaret provided Sophie with the Johnsons' contact information, phone number, and home address in southwest Portland. Sophie thanked her and said she'd contact the Johnsons to find out what had happened to Max. Margaret said she was driving to Portland immediately, would go directly to Dove Lewis to see Max, and would cover all his veterinary bills since he was still technically her responsibility under the contract she'd signed with the buyers. Sophie called the phone number Margaret had provided for the Johnsons. A woman answered, sounding tired. Hello? Hi, is this Mrs. Johnson? My name is Sophie Martinez. I'm calling about your Golden Retriever puppy Max. There was a sharp intake of breath. Max? You have information about Max? "Oh my God, is he okay? Where is he? He's at Dove Lewis Emergency Vet Hospital in Portland. He's very sick. Can you tell me what happened? How did he end up being brought to my grooming salon by different people?" Mrs. Johnson started crying. "Max was stolen from our yard 3 months ago. We let him out to play one morning and he vanished. We searched everywhere, filed police reports, put up flyers, posted on lost dog websites and Facebook groups, contacted all the shelters and vet clinics in the area. We were devastated. We never found him. You're telling me he's been in Portland this whole time? Who has him? Where has he been?" Sophie's stomach dropped. Max had been stolen. The 7 different owners who'd brought him to grooming had been part of a dog theft and resale ring, buying and selling Max repeatedly over 3 months while his actual owners grieved and searched for him. "I don't know exactly where he's been, but he's been brought to my grooming salon by different people claiming to be his owner. I think he's been stolen and resold multiple times. I'm a dog groomer, and I noticed him coming in repeatedly with different owners, and his condition was getting worse each time. Today he collapsed and I took him to the emergency vet. They diagnosed severe neglect, parvovirus and multiple other health issues." Mrs. Johnson was sobbing now. "Can we see him? Can we go to the vet hospital? Is he going to be okay? You should definitely go to Dove Lewis right away. But I have to tell you, he's very sick. The vet said his chances aren't good. The parvo is advanced and he's extremely weak from months of neglect. His breeder, Margaret Richardson, is also on her way there now." Sophie provided the hospital address and said she would come to the hospital as well after filing a report with Animal Control about the suspected theft and resale operation. She wanted to meet the Johnsons to understand how Max had been stolen and to provide all the information she'd gathered to help identify the people who'd been flipping him. Sophie spent the next hour on the phone with Multnomah County Animal Services, providing detailed information about Max's case. The animal control officer she spoke with, Jennifer Martinez, was very interested in Sophie's observations. "What you're describing sounds like an organized dog flipping operation. These groups steal high-value purebred dogs or buy them cheaply from puppy mills, then resell them multiple times to different victims on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. Each buyer thinks they're getting a healthy puppy from a good home, but really they're buying stolen property that's been kept in terrible conditions and passed around like merchandise." Jennifer explained that dog flipping had become a significant problem in the Portland area. The high demand for designer dogs and purebred puppies, combined with their high prices and the ease of advertising dogs for sale online, made dog flipping a profitable criminal enterprise. Stolen dogs could be sold for $500 to $2,000 each, and a single dog might be resold 3 or 4 times to different victims before dying from neglect or disease. "The problem is these operations are hard to track and prosecute," Jennifer said. "The people buying the dogs often don't realize they've been scammed until the dog gets sick or dies. By then the seller has moved on and can't be traced. The fake names and contact information make investigation difficult, but in this case you've given us a lot to work with. Names used, credit card records, appointment dates, photos documenting the dog's condition. That's excellent documentation." Jennifer said she would open an investigation and would coordinate with Portland police detectives who handled property theft and fraud cases. She asked Sophie to come to her office the next day to provide a formal statement and hand over all her documentation about Max's case. Sophie agreed, then drove to Dove Lewis to meet the Johnsons and Margaret Richardson. In the waiting room she found a couple in their 30s sitting with an older woman, the Johnsons and Margaret. All 3 had been crying. Sophie introduced herself, and they moved to a quiet consultation room where a veterinary technician updated them on Max's condition. "Max is stable for now, but still critical," the technician said. "He's on IV fluids, antibiotics and anti-nausea medication. We're treating the parvo aggressively, but the next 48 hours are crucial. Parvo attacks the intestinal lining and causes severe vomiting and diarrhea, leading to dehydration and secondary infections. Young puppies like Max are especially vulnerable. We're doing everything we can." The Johnsons, Karen and Brian, explained what had happened the morning Max was stolen. They'd let him into their fenced backyard around 7 a.m. while they got ready for work. Their yard was securely fenced with a 6-foot privacy fence and a locking gate. They'd checked on Max through the kitchen window periodically while making breakfast. At 7:45, when they went to bring Max inside before leaving for work, he was gone. The gate was slightly ajar, suggesting someone had opened it and taken the puppy. "We were only inside for maybe 15 minutes without directly watching him," Karen said, crying. "That's all it took for someone to steal him. We felt so guilty. We thought we'd failed him. The Johnsons had done everything possible to find Max, filed police reports, contacted animal control, registered him on lost pet databases, posted on social media, put up hundreds of flyers in their neighborhood and surrounding areas, offered a reward, contacted every veterinary clinic and animal shelter in the region to alert them about the stolen puppy. But 3 months had passed with no leads, and they'd started to accept that they might never see Max again. We were heartbroken, Brian said. Max was our first dog together. We'd spent months researching breeders, finally found Margaret and her wonderful program, waited for a puppy from her spring litter, paid $2,500 for him, prepared our home, took time off work for his first weeks with us. He was perfect, sweet, smart, healthy, everything we'd hoped for. And then he was just gone. We've been grieving for 3 months thinking we'd never see him again. Margaret Richardson, the breeder, was equally devastated. This is every breeder's nightmare. I put so much care into breeding healthy, well-socialized puppies. I screen buyers carefully to make sure my puppies go to good homes. I require contracts that specify proper care and include clauses requiring buyers to return puppies to me if circumstances change. The Johnsons were exemplary owners. They did everything right. And still, Max was stolen and ended up being abused and neglected by whoever took him. Sophie shared everything she'd documented over the 8 weeks Max had been coming to Pampered Paws, the 7 different owners, their fake names and contact information, the credit cards they'd used, the photos showing Max's progressive deterioration, her notes about the fleas, infections, injuries and behavioral changes. She explained her suspicion that Max had been stolen and was being repeatedly resold to different buyers who probably had no idea they were buying stolen property. Each person who brought him in acted like they were his owner but gave inconsistent information and seemed to have no real bond with him, Sophie explained. They'd drop him off quickly, wouldn't ask questions about his care, would pick him up and leave without the kind of interaction you'd expect from someone who loved their dog. And none of them followed my recommendations to get him veterinary care, which is why his condition kept getting worse. Karen Johnson looked at the photos Sophie had taken of Max during each grooming appointment, tears streaming down her face as she saw how her beloved puppy had suffered over 3 months. Look at him in this first photo from April. He looks sick but still has some life in his eyes. And then each photo shows him getting thinner, more injured, more hopeless. How could people do this to a puppy? How could they keep selling him when he was clearly dying? Because to them, he wasn't a living being with feelings and needs, Margaret said bitterly. He was inventory, a commodity to be sold for profit. These dog-flipping operations don't care about the animals. They're just products to be moved as quickly as possible before they die or the scheme is discovered. They sat together in the consultation room for another hour, sharing their grief and anger over what had happened to Max. They agreed to cooperate fully with the animal control investigation and any criminal investigation that might follow. Karen and Brian provided detailed information about the morning Max was stolen, descriptions of their neighborhood and any suspicious people or vehicles they'd noticed, copies of the police report they'd filed, and all the documentation of their search efforts over 3 months. Margaret provided copies of Max's registration papers, his pedigree showing his lineage from champion show dogs, his initial health certificate from her veterinarian showing he'd been healthy and up to date on vaccinations when sold to the Johnsons, and the contract she'd signed with the Johnsons specifying care requirements and the return clause. "I want to prosecute whoever did this to the fullest extent possible," Margaret said. "Not just for Max, but to send a message that dog theft and animal abuse won't be tolerated. And I want to warn other breeders and dog owners about this threat. People need to understand how common dog theft has become and take precautions to protect their pets." As they were preparing to leave the hospital, Dr. Foster came out with devastating news. "I'm so sorry, but Max has taken a turn for the worse. His heart rate is dropping, and he's not responding to treatment. His body is just too weak from months of neglect. We can continue aggressive treatment, but I need to be honest, his suffering is severe, and his chances of recovery are minimal. You may need to consider humane euthanasia." Karen collapsed into Brian's arms, sobbing. "We just got him back, and now we have to say goodbye. This isn't fair. He's only 6 months old. He should have his whole life ahead of him." Margaret stood, her face set with determination despite her tears. "Can we see him? Before making any decisions, we need to see him." Dr. Foster led them back to the intensive care unit, where Max lay on a heated pad surrounded by IV lines, monitors, and medical equipment. The puppy who'd been so full of life 3 months ago was now a skeletal shadow, his breathing labored, his eyes closed, his body still. Karen and Brian knelt beside him, gently stroking his head and telling him how much they loved him, how sorry they were that they hadn't protected him, how brave he'd been to survive as long as he had. Sophie stood back, giving the family privacy, but feeling the weight of having watched Max's decline over 8 weeks without being able to stop it. She'd documented everything, recommended veterinary care repeatedly, noticed all the warning signs, and still Max had ended up here, dying from neglect and abuse at just 6 months old. After 20 minutes with Max, the Johnsons made the heartbreaking decision to let him go. "He's suffered enough," Karen said through her tears. "We can't keep him alive just because we're not ready to say goodbye. It's not fair to him." Dr. Foster administered the euthanasia medications while the Johnsons held Max and told him he was loved, he was safe now, he could rest. Within minutes, Max's labored breathing stopped and he was gone. The puppy who'd been stolen from his yard 3 months ago, who'd been sold and resold and neglected and abused, who'd tried so hard to survive despite everything, he was finally at peace. Everyone in the room was crying. The Johnsons, Margaret, Sophie, even Dr. Foster and the veterinary technicians who'd cared for Max during his final hours. The loss felt enormous, not just because of Max specifically, but because of what he represented. Thousands of dogs stolen every year, suffering in silence, dying from neglect while their heartbroken owners searched desperately for them. Sophie left the hospital emotionally drained but filled with determination. Max's death couldn't be meaningless. She would make sure his case led to justice for him and protection for other dogs. The next morning, Sophie met with Jennifer Martinez from Multnomah County Animal Services and provided all her documentation about Max's case. Jennifer reviewed the grooming records, photos, notes, and credit card information carefully. "This is excellent documentation," Jennifer said. "You've essentially created a timeline of Max's decline and identified 7 different people involved in buying and selling him. With the credit card numbers, we can potentially track down at least some of these people and start building a case." Jennifer explained that she was coordinating with Detective Rachel Kim from Portland Police Bureau's Property Crimes Unit, who would be investigating the theft and fraud aspects of the case. Animal Control would pursue animal abuse and neglect charges, while police would pursue theft, fraud, and potentially racketeering charges if they could prove an organized criminal enterprise. The challenge with dog flipping cases is usually lack of evidence connecting the various sales, Jennifer said. Sellers use fake names, burner phones, untraceable payment methods. But in this case, several of them used credit cards at your salon, which means we have real financial information we can trace. That's huge. Over the next several weeks, investigators used the credit card information from Pampered Paws grooming appointments to identify several of the people who'd brought Max in. What they discovered was more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. The owners who'd brought Max to grooming appointments were themselves victims of fraud, people who'd purchased Max from online ads believing they were buying a healthy puppy from a legitimate source, only to discover within days or weeks that the puppy was sick and the seller had disappeared. Detective Kim interviewed each of these buyers. Their stories were remarkably similar. They'd seen ads on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace advertising golden retriever puppies for sale, prices ranging from $800 to $1,000, which was below market rate for purebred Goldens, but not so low as to be obviously suspicious. The ads featured cute photos of puppies, likely stolen from legitimate breeder websites, and descriptions of family-raised puppies from health-tested parents looking for loving homes. When buyers contacted the sellers, they were told to meet at public locations like parking lots or parks to see the puppy. The sellers, different people for different transactions, suggesting an organized operation with multiple members, would bring the puppy in a car or van, allow the buyer to hold and interact with the puppy briefly, accept cash or Venmo payment, provide a handwritten health certificate or vaccination record that was obviously fake, and then leave quickly. The buyers took their new puppies home, excited about their purchase, but within days problems became apparent. The puppies were sick, lethargy, vomiting, diarrhea, respiratory symptoms. The buyers would take the puppies to veterinarians, who would diagnose parvovirus, distemper, parasites or other serious health conditions requiring expensive treatment. When the buyers tried to contact the sellers using the phone numbers provided, the numbers were disconnected or went straight to voicemail. The buyers realized they'd been scammed. Some buyers surrendered the sick puppies to shelters or rescue groups, unable to afford the veterinary bills that could run into thousands of dollars. Others paid for treatment, hoping to save their new pets. And some, the ones Sophie had encountered, decided to recoup their losses by reselling the puppies themselves, essentially perpetuating the scam. The people who brought Max to your salon weren't necessarily part of the original theft, Detective Kim explained to Sophie during an interview at the police station. Most of them were victims who'd been scammed and were trying to get their money back by reselling the puppy.
They probably knew the puppy was sick, which is why they weren't taking him to the vet. They knew treatment would be expensive, and they were planning to sell him quickly anyway. It's a cycle of fraud where victims become perpetrators, but this realization led investigators to the actual source of the stolen dogs. By tracing back through the chain of sales, interviewing each buyer about where and how they'd acquired Max, investigators identified a core group of individuals who were stealing dogs, placing false ads online, selling the dogs to unsuspecting buyers, and then repeating the process. The investigation expanded beyond Max's case, as detectives realized this wasn't an isolated incident. The same group appeared to be responsible for dozens of dog thefts across the Portland metro area over the past year. Working with Animal Control and the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, Detective Kim identified patterns in the thefts: purebred dogs or designer mixed breeds stolen from yards during early morning hours, similar modus operandi of opening gates or cutting through fences, similar online ad language and selling practices, similar geographic clustering of thefts. They compiled a list of approximately 40 dogs reported stolen in the Portland area over 12 months that fit the pattern. By contacting the owners of these stolen dogs and showing them photos from the fraudulent online ads, they were able to confirm that at least 15 of the stolen dogs had been advertised for sale online, often within days of being stolen. The investigation led to surveillance of a property in Gresham, a working-class suburb east of Portland. Acting on a tip from one of the scam victims who remembered the address where they'd been told to pick up Max, investigators obtained a warrant to search a house on Southeast 1I2 2nd Avenue. What they found there was horrific. The house was a puppy mill and stolen dog holding facility. In the garage and basement, investigators found 16 dogs, puppies, and young adults of various popular breeds, including golden retrievers, Labrador retrievers, French bulldogs, Australian shepherds, and designer mixes like golden doodles and labradoodles. The dogs were kept in wire crates, stacked on top of each other, with minimal food and water, no veterinary care, and filthy conditions. Many of the dogs were sick, showing symptoms of parvovirus, distemper, kennel cough, and parasitic infections. Several had injuries from fighting or rough handling. By checking microchips and tattoos, investigators determined that 9 of the 16 dogs had been reported stolen from various locations around Portland over the past 6 months. The other 7 appeared to be from puppy mills or irresponsible breeders, purchased cheaply and being resold for profit. 4 individuals were arrested at the property: Marcus Chen, age 31, Jennifer Liu, age 28, Robert Martinez, age 35, and Sarah Thompson, age 26. All 4 were charged with multiple felonies, including organized animal abuse, theft, fraud, and racketeering. The charges carried potential sentences of up to 20 years in prison. The 16 dogs were seized and taken to the Multnomah County Animal Shelter for medical care and evaluation. Sadly, 3 of the dogs were so sick they had to be euthanized immediately. The other 13 received emergency veterinary treatment and were eventually reunited with their original owners, or in cases where the dogs had been bred by puppy mills rather than stolen from loving homes, were placed for adoption through rescue organizations. The investigation revealed the scope of the dog flipping operation Marcus Chen and his associates had been running. Over 18 months, they'd stolen approximately 50 dogs from yards across the Portland metro area, purchased another 30 dogs cheaply from puppy mills in other states, and sold or resold all 80 dogs multiple times through Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. They'd generated an estimated $250,000 in profit from the scheme, with individual dogs sometimes being sold 3 or 4 times to different victims before dying from neglect or disease. The scheme worked because of the high demand for purebred puppies, the ease of advertising dogs online anonymously, the difficulty of tracing sellers after transactions, and the fact that many victims didn't report being scammed because they felt foolish for not recognizing the red flags, or because they'd already lost their money and just wanted to move on. Marcus Chen was identified as the ringleader, who'd orchestrated the thefts and organized the resale operation. He had a prior criminal record, including convictions for theft and fraud. Jennifer Liu was his girlfriend who'd helped manage the holding facility and interact with buyers. Robert Martinez was responsible for stealing the dogs, using techniques like baiting dogs to fences with treats and then grabbing them, cutting through fence lines during early morning hours when owners weren't watching, and even entering yards through unlocked gates to take dogs. Sarah Thompson handled the online advertising and communicated with buyers. Sophie was asked to testify during the trial about her observations of Max over 8 weeks and her documentation of his deteriorating condition. She explained to the jury how she'd noticed the pattern of the same puppy coming in with different owners, how each owner had given different information and shown no real attachment to the dog, how Max's health had declined with each visit despite her recommendations for veterinary care, and how she'd eventually tracked down Max's real owners and discovered he'd been stolen. Max was just a puppy, innocent, trusting, sweet-natured, Sophie testified, crying as she spoke. He should have had a long, happy life with the family who loved him. Instead, he spent 3 months being stolen, sold, neglected, and abused until he was so sick he died. He was 6 months old. The defendants treated him like merchandise instead of a living being who could feel pain and fear. They knew he was sick and they kept selling him anyway because profit mattered more to them than his suffering. Karen and Brian Johnson testified about the morning Max was stolen from their yard, their 3 months of desperate searching, and the devastating moment when they were reunited with their dying puppy, only to have to make the decision to euthanize him. "We only had 20 minutes with Max before he died," Karen said through tears. 20 minutes to say goodbye to the puppy we'd loved and searched for desperately for 3 months. The defendants stole our dog, abused him, let him suffer and nearly die from neglect, and robbed us of the years we should have had with him. They destroyed our family and killed our dog, all for profit. Margaret Richardson testified about her breeding program, the care she put into producing healthy puppies, her screening process for buyers, and her contract requirements designed to ensure lifelong proper care of her puppies. "When I sell a puppy, I'm trusting that buyer to uphold their commitment to that dog's well-being for its entire life." The Johnsons upheld that commitment. They did everything right. It was Marcus Chen and his associates who violated that trust by stealing Max, treating him like disposable inventory, and causing his death through deliberate neglect. The veterinarian who treated Max at Dove Lewis testified about his condition when Sophie brought him in and the severity of his neglect. Max was dying from parvovirus, severe malnutrition, dehydration, parasites and multiple infections that had gone untreated for weeks or months. His condition was consistent with prolonged severe neglect. Parvo is preventable with proper vaccination and treatable if caught early. The fact that Max's parvo had progressed to the point where treatment was futile indicates he'd been showing symptoms for at least 2 to 3 weeks without receiving any veterinary care. That's not an accident or oversight. That's deliberate neglect. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from Sophie and others documenting Max's case. Testimony from other victims who'd had dogs stolen by the defendants or had been scammed into buying sick dogs from them. Photos and veterinary records of the dogs seized from the Gresham property showing the horrific conditions. Financial records showing the profits from the scheme. Online ads and messages proving the defendants had placed the fraudulent advertisements and communicated with buyers. The defense attorneys tried to minimize their clients' culpability, arguing they were just trying to make money in a difficult economy and hadn't intended to cause animal suffering. But the prosecution effectively countered that the defendants knew they were stealing beloved pets from families, knew they were keeping dogs in terrible conditions without proper care, knew they were selling sick and dying puppies to unsuspecting victims, and continued the scheme anyway because profit mattered more than the welfare of animals or the heartbreak of the families they were victimizing. The jury deliberated for 8 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for all 4 defendants. Marcus Chen was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Jennifer Liu received 12 years. Robert Martinez received 13 years. Sarah Thompson, who had a lesser role and cooperated with investigators by providing information about other thefts, received 8 years. In addition to prison sentences, all 4 defendants were ordered to pay restitution to their victims, including the Johnsons for Max's purchase price and veterinary bills, other owners whose dogs had been stolen and never recovered, and buyers who'd been scammed into purchasing sick dogs. They were also permanently banned from owning, possessing, or working with animals after their release from prison. The case generated significant media attention, with local news stations covering the trial extensively and highlighting the growing problem of dog theft and flipping schemes. The coverage emphasized warning signs that should alert potential dog buyers that they might be dealing with scammers, prices significantly below market rate, sellers unwilling to provide health records or let buyers visit where the puppies were raised, sellers insisting on meeting in public locations rather than at their homes, puppies appearing sick or neglected, sellers providing only fake documentation, sellers wanting cash-only transactions. Sophie was interviewed by several news outlets about her role in uncovering the scheme. She emphasized that anyone who works with pets, groomers, veterinarians, trainers, kennel workers, pet store employees, should pay attention to patterns that might indicate abuse, theft, or neglect. "I noticed Max coming in repeatedly with different owners, and his condition getting worse with each visit," Sophie told reporters. "Those were clear warning signs that something was wrong." I documented everything, asked questions, did research, and eventually contacted authorities. Anyone who works with animals has a responsibility to be observant and to speak up when they see patterns suggesting abuse or criminal activity. We're often the first line of defense for animals who can't speak for themselves. The case also led to changes in how online marketplaces handled pet sales. After extensive pressure from animal welfare organizations, Craigslist banned pet sales entirely on its platform, redirecting users to legitimate shelters and rescues instead. Facebook enhanced its screening of pet sale posts, requiring sellers to provide verification of legitimate breeding operations and removing posts that showed warning signs of scams or abuse. The Oregon legislature passed new laws strengthening penalties for dog theft and requiring anyone selling dogs online to provide proof of ownership, health records, and breeding information. The laws also required pet buyers to be given a 48-hour cooling-off period, during which they could return the pet and get a full refund if health problems were discovered, making it riskier for scammers to sell sick dogs. Local veterinary clinics and animal shelters increased their efforts to educate the public about dog theft and scams. They distributed flyers about how to protect pets from being stolen, supervising pets in yards, ensuring fences were secure and gates locked, not leaving dogs tied up outside stores unattended, microchipping all pets, keeping recent photos for identification purposes, being cautious about sharing information about expensive purebred dogs on social media. They also educated potential dog buyers about how to avoid scams, only buying from reputable breeders who could provide references and health clearances, never buying dogs from sellers who wouldn't let them visit the breeding facility, insisting on seeing health records and meeting parent dogs, being wary of prices that seemed too good to be true, taking new pets to veterinarians immediately for health checks. Sophie continued working at Pampered Paws, but with a heightened sense of vigilance. She trained all the salon's employees on warning signs of animal abuse and neglect, created protocols for documenting concerns about pets who came in repeatedly with different owners or who showed signs of poor care, and established relationships with local animal control officers who could be contacted when suspicious patterns were observed. She also volunteered with a local animal rescue organization that specialized in helping victims of dog theft recover their pets and supporting dogs rescued from abuse situations. She spoke at community events about Max's case and the importance of protecting pets from theft. She maintained contact with the Johnsons and Margaret Richardson, who'd formed a bond through their shared grief over Max. 2 years after Max's death, Sophie was invited to speak at a national conference for pet care professionals about recognizing and reporting animal abuse and theft. She told Max's story in detail, from the first grooming appointment where she'd noticed something seemed off, through the 8 weeks of documenting his decline, to the devastating moment when he collapsed and subsequently died, to the investigation that exposed a major dog theft operation.
Max's case taught me that paying attention matters, Sophie told the audience of groomers, veterinarians, trainers and pet store workers. I was just a groomer doing my job, but because I noticed a pattern and documented it and reported it, we were able to identify a criminal operation that had victimized dozens of families and dogs. Max died, and I'll always carry sadness and guilt about not acting sooner. But his death led to justice for him and protection for other dogs who might have been stolen and abused by the same criminals. Sophie emphasized that pet care professionals see patterns that others don't. They interact with the same animals repeatedly over time. They have expertise in recognizing signs of illness or abuse. They maintain records that can document changes in an animal's condition or ownership. We're uniquely positioned to notice when something is wrong, Sophie said. A dog coming in repeatedly with different owners. A cat showing signs of neglect despite supposedly having a caring owner. Pets with injuries that don't match the owner's explanations. These patterns are warning signs, and we have a responsibility to investigate and report them. The conference presentation led to Sophie being asked to help develop training materials for pet care professionals on recognizing abuse and theft. She worked with the Professional Pet Groomers and Stylists Alliance, the American Veterinary Medical Association, and animal welfare organizations to create comprehensive guidelines for what warning signs to watch for and how to report concerns appropriately. The training materials used Max's case as a detailed example and included specific protocols, how to document concerns with photos and detailed notes, how to research whether animals might be stolen by checking microchips and tattoos, how to contact animal control and law enforcement when abuse or theft was suspected, how to gather information from clients without alerting them that they were under suspicion. Over the following years, the training reached thousands of pet care professionals across the United States. It led to dozens of documented cases where groomers, veterinarians, or other pet care workers noticed suspicious patterns and reported them, resulting in recovery of stolen pets and prosecution of abuse and theft operations. A groomer in Seattle noticed a Yorkie puppy coming in with 3 different owners over 6 weeks and reported it. Investigation revealed a dog flipping scheme and rescued 12 stolen dogs. A veterinary technician in Phoenix noticed a client bringing in multiple purebred puppies over several months, always paying cash and providing minimal health history. Investigation exposed a puppy mill operation. A dog trainer in Chicago noticed a student's dog had different identification each session despite being clearly the same animal. Investigation discovered the dog had been stolen and was being used by a professional dog trainer who'd purchased it knowing it was stolen property. Each of these interventions traced back to the awareness and protocols that Max's case had helped generate. Sophie's decision to pay attention to a golden retriever puppy over 8 weeks to document his decline, to research breeder tattoos and track down his actual owners that had created ripples that extended far beyond one theft case in Portland. The Johnsons eventually adopted another golden retriever, a female they named Maxine in honor of Max. "We'll never forget Max or stop missing him," Karen said. "But we also wanted to honor him by giving another dog the loving home that Max deserved but was robbed of. Maxine is wonderful and we're extremely careful about her safety. We never let her outside unsupervised. Our yard has enhanced security with cameras and reinforced fencing. She's microchipped and always wears an ID tag. We're hyper-vigilant about her welfare in ways we weren't before because we learned the hard way how quickly a beloved pet can be stolen." Margaret Richardson continued breeding golden retrievers but implemented additional security measures for her puppy buyers. She now required buyers to install security cameras monitoring their yards, to never leave puppies unsupervised outside, to microchip puppies immediately, to register the microchips with detailed ownership information, to take photos that could be used for identification if the dog was ever stolen, and to immediately contact her if anything concerning happened with the puppy. She also created a memorial website for Max, telling his story and using it to educate the public about dog theft and abuse. The website included photos of Max as a healthy, happy puppy in his first weeks with the Johnsons, the devastating photos Sophie had taken during his grooming appointments showing his decline, and information about how to protect pets from theft and how to avoid dog-flipping scams when looking to purchase a puppy. "Max's life was far too short and ended far too tragically," Margaret wrote on the website. "But his death has meaning because it exposed criminals, led to justice, changed laws, educated the public, and potentially saved other dogs from similar fates. Every dog saved because someone learned from Max's story is part of his legacy." 5 years after Max's death, Sophie still had his photo on her phone, the sweet golden retriever puppy from that first grooming appointment, before the neglect and abuse had taken their toll, when he still had life and hope in his eyes. She looked at that photo regularly, a reminder of why her vigilance mattered, why documenting concerns was important, why speaking up about abuse made a difference. Max had been one puppy among thousands Sophie had groomed over her career, but he was also the puppy who'd taught her that her role extended beyond grooming dogs to protecting them. She'd watched him come in 8 times over 8 weeks with different owners, watched his condition deteriorate, documented everything, tracked down his real owners, exposed a criminal operation. She'd done what needed to be done, even though it hadn't been enough to save Max's life, but maybe it had been enough to save other dogs. Maybe the training programs that came from Max's case would help other pet care professionals notice similar patterns and act sooner. Maybe the families who'd learned about dog theft would protect their pets more carefully. Maybe the laws that were strengthened would deter potential thieves. Maybe the criminals who'd been prosecuted would serve as warnings to others considering similar schemes. One dog groomer, one golden retriever puppy, 8 weeks of observation and documentation, one tragedy that became a catalyst for awareness and change. That was Max's legacy. That was what his short, suffering-filled life had ultimately meant. It wasn't enough. Max deserved to have lived a long, happy life with the family who loved him, but in the absence of that justice, there was at least the knowledge that his death had protected other dogs, educated thousands of people, changed laws and policies, exposed criminals, and reminded pet care professionals of their responsibility to the animals in their care. Sophie continued grooming dogs, paying attention to patterns, watching for warning signs, ready to act if she ever saw another Max, another pet showing signs of abuse, another animal being passed between owners suspiciously, another creature suffering while the humans around them failed to notice or care. She would notice, she would document, she would report, she would do for other animals what she'd tried to do for Max, and hopefully next time it would be soon enough to save them. That was the promise Sophie had made the day Max died, and it was a promise she intended to keep for the rest of her career and life. Animals depended on humans to protect them, to notice when they were suffering, to act on their behalf when they couldn't advocate for themselves. Sophie would be that human, that observer, that protector for Max and for every animal who needed someone to notice.
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.